In the 1960s, the Soviet Union is in a scientific and technological race with the West to understand the inner depths of our planet. But this investigation is not part of the Soviet Union's open military rivalry. It's a scientific step to understand the geology that is hidden thousands of feet beneath us.
There's something about deep, dark holes in the ground that just feels off. Maybe it's the sheer emptiness, the feeling that anything could be lurking down there, just out of sight. Or maybe it's the fact that some of these places defy logic, pits that burn forever, sinkholes that open without warning, and caverns that seem to stretch endlessly into the abyss. Some of them feel less like natural wonders and more like entrances to something sinister.
At the moment, the way that we look inside the Earth is through what we call seismic waves. We make a big explosion on the Earth's surface, and we see the way the shock waves travel into the Earth and back out again. And we come up with structures, we find barriers in there. But what are they?
One of the most infamous, the Kola Super Deep Borehole. The Kola Super Deep Borehole wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was humanity's attempt at drilling straight into the Earth's secrets. And what started as a Soviet science experiment in 1970 turned into one of the strangest and honestly creepiest things ever done. This wasn't some little backyard project. This was the deepest man-made hole on the planet, stretching a ridiculous 12,262 meters into the Earth's crust. To put that in perspective, if you dropped Mount Everest into it, the peak wouldn't even come close to sticking out. The goal was simple: drill as deep as physically possible and see what's down there. And they did find stuff, a lot of it, but it wasn't what they expected. Scientists figured they'd hit a clear boundary where granite turned into basalt, but nope, just more metamorphic rock, completely throwing off what they thought they knew about Earth's layers. They also found water, hot, mineralized, and way deeper than they thought water could exist. And then there were the 2-billion-year-old microfossils, proof that ancient life existed far deeper than anyone imagined. Oh, and let's not forget the hydrogen gas that was basically boiling up from the depths. The drill site literally oozes smelly, flammable gas, making the whole thing feel way more sci-fi horror than science experiment. Drilling down was one thing. Keeping the equipment from melting, that was another. The deeper they got, the hotter it became. Like way hotter than expected. By the time they reached the deepest point in 1992, the temperature was 180 degrees Celsius, hot enough to wreck their drilling tech and turn the whole project into a logistical nightmare. Between the extreme heat, the crushing rock pressure, and constant mechanical failures, they finally had to call it quits. In 2005, they sealed it with a metal cap, and now the Kola Super Deep Borehole is just a forgotten relic of Cold War science, sitting in the middle of nowhere. But if you think the Kola Super Deep Borehole was unsettling, wait until you hear about a place that's been on fire for over 50 years. Meet the gates of hell. This thing is a massive burning crater in the middle of the Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan and has been on fire for years. No one put up signs, no barriers, nothing. Just a gaping pit of fire sitting in the desert, waiting for someone to get a little too curious. And the weirdest part? It wasn't supposed to happen. Back in 1971, Soviet geologists were drilling for oil when they accidentally hit a massive underground gas pocket. Not only did the ground collapse, swallowing their equipment whole, but it also started leaking methane, which, in case you didn't know, is extremely flammable. Now, this is where things get insane. The engineers, in all their Soviet wisdom, figured the best way to handle the gas leak was to light it on fire, expecting it to burn out in a few days. Spoiler alert, it didn't. So what's keeping it burning? No one actually knows for sure. Scientists have studied it, but the exact reason it's still burning is a mystery. Somehow, decades later, the crater is still spewing flames like an open wound in the earth, and some geologists believe it may never stop. The crater itself is massive, around 230 feet wide and 100 feet deep, and it's basically a glowing, red-hot death trap. The walls are lined with scorched rock. The heat is unbearable, and the whole thing hisses like a giant pissed-off dragon. Stand too close, and you'll feel your eyebrows crisping. So, of course, it's a tourist attraction. For a place that could literally cook you alive, it's surprisingly popular. Adventurers and thrill-seekers travel miles into the desert just to camp next to it, because apparently nothing says vacation like sleeping beside a never-ending inferno. In 2022, Turkmenistan's president announced they were planning to put it out, citing environmental concerns and gas wastage. But considering they've been saying that for years and it's still burning, let's just say we're not holding our breath. But fire and bottomless pits aren't the only things that make the earth feel unnatural. Some places don't burn, they loom, towering above the world like something straight out of a lost civilization. That brings us to Mount Roraima, a place so surreal it looks like it belongs on another planet. This alien-looking flat-topped giant sits right at the meeting point of Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana, rising over 9,200 feet into the sky. But it's not just tall, it's ancient. We're talking about a mountain that's been standing for millions of years, watching entire species rise and fall like it's some kind of stone time capsule. Roraima doesn't play by the usual mountain rules. Instead of sloping gently upward, this thing shoots straight out of the ground like a massive stone wall with cliffs as high as 3,300 feet. The top, perfectly flat, it looks less like a mountain and more like a lost world, cut off from everything below. If you've ever seen The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle or The Floating Mountains in Avatar, this is where that inspiration came from. And let's talk about age. Most mountains on Earth are still young in geological terms, but Mount Roraima is a leftover chunk of a plateau that existed over 2 billion years ago. That means this thing has been around since before the first complex life crawled out of the ocean. The isolation of Mount Roraima turned it into a real-life evolutionary experiment. The creatures and plants up there, most of them exist nowhere else on Earth. The rainfall is constant, the terrain is brutal, and the whole place is shaped by erosion in ways that make it look otherworldly. The ecosystem is so unique that scientists still don't fully understand everything that's living up there. The first Europeans to climb it were Sir Everard Thurn and Harry Innes Perkins in 1884, and they barely made it up. They had to find the one natural ramp leading to the top, because trying to climb those sheer rock walls, yeah, good luck with that. Even today, most people still use the same path, because there's basically no other way up without serious climbing gear. The local Pemon people knew about Roraima long before any outsiders came sniffing around. The name itself comes from their language, Roroi and Ma, a reference to the mountain's mystical presence and the way it interacts with the sky. But Mount Roraima isn't the only place that feels untouchable. Some places don't rise into the sky. They swallow everything whole. That brings us to Devil's Sinkhole, a place so deep and dark it might as well be a direct line to the underworld. This isn't just a hole in the ground. It's a massive, gaping maw that looks like the earth itself decided to open wide and take a bite out of Texas. Located in Edwards County, this 400-foot deep limestone pit is so steep and dark that if you drop something in, you're probably never seeing it again. And trust me, you wouldn't want to be the thing that falls in. This sinkhole wasn't just some random discovery either. People have been eyeing this place for thousands of years. Artifacts found near the site date back over 4,000 years, meaning ancient humans were probably just as freaked out by it as we are today. The first modern record of it came in 1876, when a guy named Ammon Billings stumbled across it while exploring the area. His wife and her friends took one look at the abyss and basically said, "Yeah, that's definitely the devil's work." The name stuck, but it's not just an eerie pit in the ground, it's alive. Millions of Mexican free-tailed bats call it home, erupting from the depths at sunset in a swirling black tornado of wings and high-pitched screeches. It's like watching a living storm rain pour out of the earth every single night, and while the bats are busy feasting on insects, cave swallows move in, taking over their space like clockwork. The sinkhole operates on its own weird, perfect schedule, a never-ending cycle of wings, darkness, and eerie silence. And if the bats weren't enough, the underground lakes inside the cavern hold creatures you won't find anywhere else on the planet. There's a species of tiny shrimp-like amphipods that exist only in these hidden waters. Plus, a rare aquatic isopod that's basically a prehistoric-looking crustacean. Texas knew this place was special, so it became a National Natural Landmark in 1968. Then, in 1985, the state took control, and by 1992, it opened for visitors, but with some serious restrictions. You can't just waltz up to this thing. Tours are controlled, access is limited, and the entire place is carefully managed to keep it as untouched and mysterious as possible. The Devil's Sinkhole is terrifying in its own way, but it doesn't hold a candle to a place where the ground literally spits fire. That brings us to Mount Erebus, a volcano so extreme it's home to one of the world's only permanently active lava lakes. And unlike most volcanoes that erupt and go back to sleep, Erebus is one of the few that keeps a permanent lava lake boiling at its summit. Yeah, while the rest of Antarctica is frozen solid, Erebus sits there with an open pit of fire, as if the Earth itself decided to challenge the ice to a never-ending battle. Standing at 12,448 feet, Erebus is part of Ross Island, towering over research stations like McMurdo and Scott Base. Scientists stationed nearby basically get front-row seats to one of the most extreme environments on Earth. The volcano regularly tosses out strombolian eruptions, which means it hurls out molten rock like it's playing dodgeball with boulders. Erebus was first spotted in 1841 by Captain James Clark Ross, who had the absolute luck of seeing it mid-eruption. He named it after his ship, HMS Erebus, which, fun fact, was later lost in the Arctic while searching for the Northwest Passage. Bad omen? Maybe. In 1908, members of Ernest Shackleton's Nimrod expedition became the first to climb it. Imagine climbing a volcano in Antarctica, as if normal mountaineering wasn't hard enough. But the most infamous event tied to Erebus happened on November 28, 1979, when Air New Zealand Flight 901 slammed into the volcano's slopes due to a navigation error. All 257 people on board were killed, making it one of the worst disasters in Antarctic history. This volcano isn't just a fiery tourist attraction, it's a scientific goldmine. Researchers monitor its eruptions using seismic studies and satellite imaging to figure out how it works. But it's not just the lava that fascinates them. Extreme microorganisms somehow manage to survive in this nightmarish landscape, giving scientists clues about what life might look like on other planets. Erebus also plays a huge role in understanding Antarctica's geological past. It's part of a chain of volcanoes, including Mount Terror and Mount Bird, that helped shape Ross Island. The volcano's summit caldera formed about 18,000 years ago after a massive eruption, and ever since, it's been doing its best to remind the world that Antarctica isn't just ice, it's fire too. If Mount Erebus is Antarctica's fiery rebellion against the ice, then Tamjar Blue Hole is the deep, endless void of the ocean, daring anyone to figure out what's lurking inside. Tamjar Blue Hole is the deepest known blue hole on Earth, and it is absolutely terrifying. This isn't just a scenic underwater sinkhole where divers take selfies. This is a vertical ocean abyss, plunging an insane 1,380 feet straight down into the black void below. That's deeper than the Empire State Building is tall. If you drop something in, it wouldn't just sink, it would disappear into the unknown. This beast lurks in Chetumal Bay, off the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, and its name isn't just for show. Tam Ja translates to deep water in Mayan, which might be the understatement of the century. For a long time, no one knew how deep it actually went. Even after it was first discovered by a local diver back in 2003, the best estimates put it at around 275 meters. But in 2024, researchers finally confirmed the truth. This thing obliterated all previous records, dethroning China's Dragon Hole as the deepest blue hole ever recorded. Tam Ja isn't just some random hole in the ocean. It was sculpted by nature itself, carved out over thousands, maybe millions of years. Blue holes like this form through karst processes where slightly acidic seawater slowly dissolves the limestone bedrock, creating massive caverns. Over time, the ceiling collapses, leaving behind a gaping maw in the ocean floor. And thanks to the Yucatan's wild geological history, massive fault lines, underground river systems, and even the impact of the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, this region is full of bizarre underwater caves. There's even a theory that Tam Ja might be connected to other hidden tunnels and aquifers stretching as far as Florida. That means this hole could be part of something even bigger, an entire subterranean labyrinth of unknown waterways. No one really knows what's down there because no one has explored the bottom. Scientists have sent down specialized equipment, things like conductivity, temperature, and depth profilers, but they haven't even fully mapped the bottom yet. Nobody knows what's really down there. Strange bacteria, hidden ecosystems, something we aren't meant to find. Whatever's waiting in the depths, it's been untouched for thousands of years. If Tam Ja is an abyss that swallows the ocean whole, Aokigahara Forest is the kind of place that swallows you whole. This isn't just any forest, it's a twisted, tangled mass of trees at the foot of Mount Fuji, and it has a reputation that makes even the bravest people think twice before stepping inside. The vegetation in this place is so thick that sunlight struggles to get in, and sound barely makes it out. Once you step inside, the outside world disappears. GPS, unreliable. Compass, good luck. The volcanic rock under the ground messes with magnetism. You could swear you're walking in a straight line, only to find yourself right back where you started. This eerie silence and near total isolation. That's exactly why people have been drawn here for centuries. Some come for the natural beauty, because let's be real, it's stunning. Moss-covered trees twist over the rocky ground, and ancient lava caves cut through the earth. But others come for a much darker reason. Aokigahara has been known as Japan's suicide forest since the 1960s, when it became a well-known spot for people to disappear. Some say it goes back even further, to old folktales about yurei, vengeful spirits lurking between the trees, waiting for lost souls to join them. It sits on the hardened lava from Mount Fuji's last major eruption in 864 CE. So beneath the forest floor, it's a geological battlefield. The lava rock is porous, absorbing sound like a sponge, making it one of the quietest places you'll ever step foot in. No wind, no rustling leaves. Even the few animals that live here, foxes, deer, birds, seem to know not to make a sound. It's the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Despite its chilling reputation, Aokigahara still attracts hikers, nature lovers, and thrill seekers who want to test their nerves. Some come for the caves, like the Narusawa Ice Cave, where ice never melts, even in the middle of summer. Aokigahara traps you in silence, but Bolivia's Uyuni Salt Flats, they erase everything. Uyuni Salt Flats. No trees, no landmarks, no sound, just an endless stretch of blinding white that swallows the horizon in every direction. It's the largest salt flat on Earth, covering over 4,000 square miles of pure, unbroken vastness. Once you step onto it, you might as well be walking on another planet. This place wasn't always here. 40,000 years ago, it was a prehistoric lake, huge and deep, covering the Altiplano. Then it dried up, leaving behind a desert of salt so thick you could drive on it for miles without a single bump. That salt crust, meters deep, packed solid, blindingly white, stand in the middle of it, and you might as well be on another planet. But Uyuni isn't just an empty wasteland, it's full of surprises. There's Nkawasi Island, a rocky outcrop rising from the salt like a mirage, covered in cacti taller than your house. There's the train cemetery, a rusting graveyard of locomotives left behind from Bolivia's mining boom. And then there's what's hidden beneath the surface, lithium. More than half of the world's supply is buried right under these flats, waiting to be extracted and turned into batteries for phones, cars, and everything else that runs on power. Life out here is tough, but it exists. Tiny villages on the outskirts still mine salt by hand, chipping away at an endless supply. Flamingos show up in the wet season, wading through shallow pools like they own the place. And the people, they have their own legends about the salt flats, tales of mountain gods and volcanic feuds that shaped the land long before science had an explanation. If Uyuni feels otherworldly, Socotra Island takes it to another level. Socotra is what happens when nature decides to go rogue. Everything about it screams ancient, untouched, and just a little bit alien. The place has been isolated for millions of years, and evolution took full advantage of that, cooking up plants and animals you won't find anywhere else. If the Galapagos Islands had a weird, reclusive cousin that no one talks about enough, it would be Socotra. It's big, about 132 kilometers long, but it doesn't waste any of that space. The terrain is all over the place. You've got coastal plains where sand dunes shift around like they own the place, vast limestone plateaus dotted with bizarre vegetation, and then the Hajia Mountains, jagged granite peaks rising up to 1,500 meters, standing like ancient guardians over the whole thing. The landscape is so strange that even the wind respects it, carving out deep caves and twisting the trees into surreal shapes. Speaking of trees, Socotra is home to some of the most mind-bending plant life on the planet. The dragon's blood tree, it looks like an umbrella made of angry snakes and bleeds red sap when cut. Frankincense trees grow in twisted, gnarled clumps, barely clinging to the rocks. Over a third of the island's plant species exist nowhere else, and the animals follow suit. Almost every reptile here is unique, and the land snails, they've evolved into their own little isolated kingdom. Even the birds that drop by seem to know they're stepping onto something special. Humans have lived here for thousands of years, but Socotra never let them take over. The people speak Socotri, a language that sounds like it time-traveled from the past, and they've managed to maintain traditions that have been passed down for centuries. Despite technically being part of Yemen, the island has a vibe all its own, one that feels as ancient as the land itself. Socotra feels like a forgotten world, shaped by time and isolation. But some places don't just stand still, they burn. Just like Yanar Dagh, this place just outside Baku, where the ground has been on fire for centuries. Not smoldering, not flickering out overnight. This thing has been burning, non-stop, for as long as anyone can remember. Yanar Dagh, which literally means burning mountain, is a hillside that refuses to go dark. No one set it on fire. No one maintains it. The earth itself is feeding the flames. This isn't some trick of the light or a tiny campfire sputtering out in the wind. The flames at Yanar Dagh stretch nearly 10 feet across, licking at the air like something alive. Even when the rain comes pouring down, the fire doesn't waver. It's fueled by an endless supply of natural gas, leaking up through cracks in the ground, seeping from deep reservoirs beneath Azerbaijan's Absheron Peninsula. The country isn't called the Land of Fire for nothing. Flames like this have been popping up all over the place for thousands of years, feeding into ancient religions, myths, and a whole lot of superstitions. Back in the day, this was sacred ground. The Zoroastrians, one of the world's oldest religious groups, saw fire as a direct link to the divine. When they found a place where flames literally erupted from the earth, they didn't just take notice, they built temples around it. Pilgrims traveled for miles just to stand in front of these eternal flames, believing they were looking at something supernatural. Even today, Yanar Dagh still carries that air of mystery. No one can look at a hillside that's been burning for centuries and just shrug it off as normal. One of the wildest things about Yanar Dagh is how it was discovered in modern times. The story goes that sometime in the 1950s, a shepherd was just going about his business when he flicked a cigarette onto the ground and the whole thing went up in flames. That's how much gas was leaking through the soil. Just one spark, and suddenly the land was ablaze. But here's the catch. Historical records talk about fires like this in the region way before the 20th century. Travelers from ancient Greece, Marco Polo, and Persian chroniclers all wrote about the bizarre, ever-burning flames of Azerbaijan. And it's not just the fire that makes this place weird. Stand too close, and you'll feel the heat hitting you like an oven blast. The ground itself is hot, even in winter. Snow doesn't stand a chance. Before it even lands, it's gone. And if you get close enough, you might notice something even stranger: no smoke. Most fires send thick clouds of it billowing into the sky, but Yanar Dag burns clean. Azerbaijan has tried to preserve this bizarre natural phenomenon, turning Yanar Dag into a protected site in 2007. There's even a small visitor center nearby where people can learn about how these fires shaped the country's history. And yet there's no fence keeping people away. What other unnatural phenomena are there that have no answers? Maybe there's a deeper meaning to all of these.